Good evening. Sorry, I gave people a little bit of a jump. Thank you all for coming. My name is Doug Smith. I'm one of the local New York State Assembly members here. I'm also the ranking member of the Education Committee in the New York State Assembly. So thank you so much for joining us for this important event and taking time out of your evening. Tonight, I think you're going to really enjoy this presentation with our good friend and moderator, Lisa Navarra, who has spent so much of her life working to help children, not only in our community, but across New York State. And she's helped assemble an expert panel on the issues of mental health and wellness and expert and veteran educators. So I just want to take a moment. Lisa Navarra is our moderator. You're going to be hearing from her in a little bit. But I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists here. We have Dr. Orly Calderon, Associate Professor and Director of Assessment, Psychological Services Center, and the Clinical Psychology Program at LIU Post. Thank you. We have Dr. Gloria Taylor-Jackson. She's the principal of Twin Pines Elementary School in Brentwood School District and the SANES Region 1 Government Relations Committee as well. Thank you. We know who the most popular person here is. No, that's wonderful. Dr. Dominic Palma, the superintendent of the Merrick Schools and also the co-chair of the Nassau County Mental Health and Related Services Committee. Thank you. Dr. Joe Volpe, who's a clinical psychologist, a school psychologist, and executive director of East End Psychological Services. Thank you. We have Rhonda Young, assistant superintendent of special services at Brentwood Schools. Thank you so much. Love it. I'm feeling some love from the Brentwood School District. Thank you all for joining us here. We had two other panelists who I think may not be able to join us tonight or maybe on the way. Kimberly Clark, who's the assistant coordinator to the assistant superintendent of special services in the Brentwood School District. She helped organize and was involved with this as well. We can give her a round of applause, absolutely. And Dr. Vera Foyer, Associate Vice President of the School of Mental Health, the Northwell Health Director and Pediatric Emergency Psychiatry and Behavioral Health Urgent Care. And she could not be here this evening, but she did so much work with this as well. And I know she's been in touch with the panelists and with Lisa, so we want to thank her as well for her time on this. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and someone who, as I mentioned, Lisa Navarra, has just done so much work on the issue of mental health and helping children. And I can tell you, as somebody who was a former high school teacher, if you ask a teacher, what is it that you teach, at the end of the day, we may teach subjects. I was a math teacher, but we're actually teaching children. And I think that taking a look and taking that whole child approach is something that we want to really promote in education. And I think we're going to hear a lot of great things today. And I hope that you enjoy the presentation and take a lot with you. And please just spread the word, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to have the ability for everyone to ask questions and have a nice dialogue. So thank you so much. I'm turning it over to Lisa Navarra. Thank you, Lisa. Oh, actually, you don't need that. I'll take this.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. So now you have a little glimpse as to who we are, but just as important, it's important for us as a community to know who you are. So by a show of hands, are you an educator? And look around too, see who's amongst you. By a show of hands, are you an administrator? Related service provider, OT, PT, speech. That's next, psychology, psychologist, social worker, parent. Anyone invested in the children's well-being? All of us, yes? That's what brings us here together this evening. That's what's going to help us to create a paradigm shift for children who need it the most. Us who's going to leave here tonight inspired and looking to take action. As we proceed tonight, Please make sure that your phones are silenced. And also, if you have any questions, please write them down. You'll learn a little bit more about our central theme, so you could keep your questions toward that panel and discussion theme. You'll be asked your name, your role, your organization that you belong to, and then just the question that you would like us to answer. And when doing so, you can mention which panelist that you would like to answer the question, and if it doesn't matter, you could just open it up to the whole panel, okay? 32% of children who have combined ADHD, that's inattentive and hyperactivity, drop out of high school. 50 to 70% of children who have ADHD are rejected by a close friend by second grade. Way too early, way too many. Would you agree? Yes. That's pre-pandemic. Now, post-pandemic, we are seeing so many children, many more children from preschool through high school struggling. They're struggling to focus, to self-regulate. They're struggling to make positive decisions and make and maintain positive relationships. These deficits are persistent, and they're daunting. And educators are really at an impasse. What do? Do they teach rigorously that curriculum to close the achievement gap of 1, 2, 3 years in the classroom? Do they teach towards children's mental health and well-being and ability to self-regulate? Which is it? In the end, they have to take state tests. Where are we with education? Well, we're at an impasse is what we're at. But you're all here to join the action in ways that we can support our children and our educators today. So, as a panel, we propose a new approach to education. And that approach is to integrate mental health strategies into the classroom while working cohesively with mental health staff and teaching explicit cognitive skills so children can learn to self-regulate, so children can learn to believe in themselves and their abilities. That's what's going to help close that achievement gap, and also involving the parents in that same type of education. Tonight's central theme is just that. It will be more focused in on the classroom and schools and mental health. And with the help of you, should you take action and show interest that you want to hear from us again, then we can have another panel and discussion, one that really warrants itself to parents and that education. Panelists, take a look over here. Everyone, please look over here. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. Life is hard. I think I can't do it. I'm not smart like the other kids. Raise your hand if you've ever heard a child say any of these things. And look around. This is what we need to change, isn't it? So here's our purpose. Establish an awareness of how students struggle learning and the impact that it has on mental health. Increase stakeholders and communities' knowledge about mental health and its role in learning. Increase teacher training with evidence-based approaches to support students' executive functioning skills. Advocate for legislative policy and funding to support professional learning for educators, related service providers, and parents in both the general and special education classroom. I have to stop here and absolutely acknowledge Assemblyman Doug Smith, because he is allowing this tonight. He is allowing us to have a purpose, to have a panel of authority figures who have thought and acted outside of the box, who have created a world within their own to really be inspired to help others and share what they know. And it also allows you as a community to join in with us because we all are one in all of this. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a special thank you to his Chief of Staff, Sean Himes, because he was there every step of the way, answering questions and emails and phone calls too. So thank you very much. So a round of applause for Assemblyman Doug Smith for not being afraid to take a change, make a change for kids. This is mature content. I don't see any children, but if I've missed any, then this is something that you may want to consider, okay? It's not an easy thing to hear, but that's okay because we're real and it's us and we need to talk about the reality. But I did want to mention that in case there were any youngsters among you.
Nobody got my story. Nobody understood what I was going through. Nobody knew what was wrong with me.
We were split up at times to read different books, and there would be a lower group, and it would keep stacking. I was always in the lower group. I hated it, and just because of that, I thought, hey, let's piss them off. I'm not going to do any of the damn work and see what they do. And I was confronted many times, and I was like, I told them, tell me what you're going to do to me. Tell me. And they just told me I'm going to fail you, and you're going to restart this year, so I had to get my act together.
It's so much easier to write my feelings than to tell my feelings because it's only the paper that's knowing them. I sometimes feel like no one listens to what I need to say. I sometimes feel like people make fun of me. Then I get angry. I need to do something that can save myself from a fight. I need to get my brains back to do what is right. I feel like the world means nothing to me when I'm angry.
I felt hopeless, for a long time, I felt like I can't do anything. It's like I had a poor future. Then I thought maybe I could just change that future. I found a solution to my number one issue, which was my anger.
There was such a depressing time in my life. I never totally thought of suicide. I thought, what happened if a freak accident happened and I died? Would that be better? Would that make the world less dumb? Because I thought I was just one of those people who they say every time you talk, you made the world dumber. I would say to myself, that is true. Every time I do say something or think something, I made the world dumber. And I would be like, oh, I just did it again.
We went to recess and I got pulled out. And I had to sit there and read.
Okay, Abby, you have 5 minutes exactly to read the passage and answer the questions. Starting now.
It was just making me so angry. Why am I losing recess every day? Why? The teacher went out of the classroom, and I heard her say, Abby's stupid. I was like, well, she called me stupid, so I must be stupid. It was just like the worst year of my life. It was a nightmare. It wouldn't stop.
She had written a note that she wanted to read to them at school, and it said, if you knew how I felt, you would see how hard it is. I would let you in and get you help, but now it's too late. See you never again. And she had drawn her broken heart to show how she was feeling.
If you don't get the right help, then it's not worth, living almost. We heard it's important that you do ask for help. Even though it can feel a bit shameful, ask for it. It's really important for children to have this extra help because that's what makes them able to go on to great things.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, this is existing a very long time. This documentary was created over 10 years ago. You want to see what we've seen now? This is a couple weeks ago. These students here learned about the cognitive skill of positive self-talk. They learned to use it explicitly as a cognitive skill to help them socially, emotionally, academically, behaviorally. So when they wrote a negative comment, this individual said, "You can't do anything right. Just give up. You'll never pass 5th grade." And named that voice Grayson. The positive voice was Eric. And Eric said, "You are in control. You will pass 5th grade. You can do something. You are not useless." This child said, "I am the dumbest kid alive. I can study my words and multiplication." Doesn't this look like the documentary of almost 10 years ago? The same problem exists, but the pandemic made it worse. So here we are in education. This child learned about perception, and perception to use as a cognitive skill. By a show of hands, how many of you have seen children cry, have anxiety, be over worried that they had to take a test that they didn't think that they would pass? By a show of hands. And what do we say? Just do your best. We just want to know where you're at. And does that help? No. But we live in a system, and that system, as long as it stays the way it is, these kids need to learn cognitive skills in perception while we work the background in changing policy and curriculum. This child, as you can see, she was crying, and in the end, she was happy. My favorite tool is perception because it helps me calm down. One day I took a test. I was crying because I think that I will not have it right. I took a breath, and when I breathed, I tried my best, and I did it right. I was so happy. That's why I like the perception tool. Perception is a cognitive skill, lies within the working memory. It comes from a place. We are demanding children to perform in a certain way without giving them the skills and the knowledge that they need. But hold on, how can we? When educators and parents and service providers, they're not trained either. So we need to do different. Because what we're seeing in the schools for mental health are some of these and so many more: ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, school avoidance, anxiety, depression. And now, this is the executive functioning that supports self-regulation part of it. We want to teach you, so when we speak, you know a little bit of a background if you already don't have one. Social emotional learning, the process to acquire and apply the skills to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve goals. Show empathy for others, establish supportive relationships, and responsible decisions. Now, I mentioned that working memory, right? Working memory is actually the #1 indicator of success. It's not IQ. Why don't educators know about working memory? It's time that changes. The ability to acquire, access, and apply information. Self-regulation, the ability to manage one's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Wouldn't that be great as children, adolescents, and adults? And executive functioning, a set of mental skills that include working memory, flexible thinking, and self-control. We use these skills every day to learn, work, and manage life, and we need to be teaching them explicitly for pre-pandemic and post-pandemic reasons. And now our panelists. Thank you, each and every one of you, for saying yes to being part of this wonderful paradigm shift in education, taking your time to share your experience, your knowledge, and your wisdom. Panelists, since the return of the shutdown in 2020, we've heard so many things like "I'm stupid," "I can't," "everyone is smarter than I am." Can consistent failure in school be traumatic for children? What are the likely implications for mental health? Briefly describe the concerns that you have for your students or the children that you serve. Dr. Calderon? Press that. This is your mic.
That?
Yes.
Oh, hello. All right. So thank you again, Lisa, and thank you, Assemblyman Smith, for organizing this. Thank you all for being here. I was saying that I can speak to this question both from the anecdotal clinical point of view in terms of what we see at the clinic where I'm the director of assessment at Long Island University. We definitely see increase in psychological distress. We definitely see children presenting with internalizing disorder, but I can also speak to it from reports that have come up actually around the world. Jerome Sattler just recently released a report that he has written collecting data on the impact of the pandemic on development of children across the world, not just in the United States. I don't know if you had a chance to see that. It's on his website. It's amazing. The data that he has collected. And he cites, yes, there's definitely academic regression, but there's also sleep disturbance, PTSD-like symptoms, emotional distress. Particularly, we see increase in children who already have special needs, an increase in their needs in terms of additional challenges. The Surgeon General report from 2021 also notes this type of increase in psychological distress, particularly suicidality, particularly among girls, females. Did you see that as well?
Yes, likewise. I also would like to thank Lisa and also Assemblyman Smith, all of the attendees in the audience, especially my Brentwood family who've come here to support this very meaningful dialogue and discussion. So yes, upon review of the research literature, I am observing much of what has been published from COVID-19 pandemic studies, both throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic, that girls are having elevated levels of anxiety compared to their male counterparts. Also, there is increased anxiety exhibited for students who had a family member or close friend who was a frontline worker, specifically healthcare providers. Those students in particular have demonstrated an elevated levels of of anxiety. And then finally, we're finding that those individuals who come from lower socioeconomic communities and individuals who are part of what is being termed as a minority racial or ethnic background are also at an increase in heightened risk. So those are the findings, and those are the subgroups that are impacted largely.
So in addition to those subgroups, Dr. Jackson,
yes,
in your own building, what are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing students who are coming to school feeling underprepared and lacking those school readiness skills that are needed to be successful in their particular grade. We're noticing that students did not receive the necessary interventions during their preschool years, and as a result, it is impacting their early childhood experiences in the first and second grade. The Department of Education released findings that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, beginning in 2018 through 2021, there was a significant decline in preschool Committee on Special Education referrals and services, to the likelihood of 800 and something thousand, reduced to only perhaps 500,000. Okay, so all of those students who did not receive those necessary support systems are coming to school lacking those prerequisite skills, and they're not only just demonstrating verbally what we've seen here and in written form, but also behaviorally. They're acting out aggressive behaviors, they're easily agitated, and they're just really crying out for support.
Thank you. Ms. Young, can you speak to us about what you see within your population of students that you serve, including the preschool children?
Well, yes. First, thank you, Lisa. I'd like to thank everyone who came out today. Thank you. So, in terms of special education, I could say that we're seeing an uptick in actually referrals at the preschool level since COVID. We have 3 times the number of students being referred for preschool services. I think one of the bigger issues is that many of the community-based organizations that offer preschool, because a lot of the schools they simply can't afford early intervention services. It becomes very taxing on a district. So many of the community-based organizations offer preschool classes, but they're not 4410 approved. That means approved to offer special education. So they offer related services in many of our CBOs, but they don't offer mental health support services, different services that many of our students that exhibit behavior need. And actually recently, the National Association for the Education of Young Children at their annual conference, they went over research that preschoolers who receive mental health services are less likely to be diagnosed with a disability. So I think that uptick in new referrals for preschool students partially comes from the fact that we don't offer mental health support services in many of our preschool programs.
And even in preschool, do you think that teacher training and being able to support them cognitively would be helpful?
Absolutely, and now I'm focused on preschool, but I'm thinking many of the CBOs hire teachers at a very low salary, and they're not required to have the same certification as, say, the teachers that teach in a public school. So I think sometimes that comes into play, and you don't have teachers with that same level of training. Should there be increased training? Absolutely. I think we were all, and I'm going to school age now, I think that the focus was really on high stakes testing and getting kids to perform well on those tests. And I don't think enough attention was really paid to social emotional health.
Thank you. Dr. Palmer, do you think that consistent failure in school can contribute and have mental health implications? And in addition, what are you seeing with the students that you serve?
It's almost a question not worth answering. Of course. Of course, if you consistently fail at life, and for kids, school is life, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be miserable. I want to pick up on one of the themes about preschool, though. Because I think it's important information to have. So we had a great year in schools in that the legislature incorporated a very large amount of money for universal pre-K and school aid. So universal pre-K programs expanded or popped up in school districts that didn't have them before, such as mine. So we're new to it. Problem, though, is that the level of aid is insufficient to support a program. So what many districts have done, similar to mine, is they go to the community-based organizations and say, please run our program. But now getting back to your point is then you hire teachers at maybe half the rate of pay that they would be hired for schools, which would be bad if this was 10 years ago when there was an overabundance of teachers. But we're also at a period of teacher shortage. So now there are fewer and fewer people around to take those jobs. So we have some good news, we have some bad news. Universal pre-K is popping up all over the place. If the state continues funding it next year, we could be a couple years down the line where universal pre-K could almost be universal. But we need a greater level of funding, so we are hiring teachers who come to the table with better training, and then we have the opportunities to further train them to do the kind of work that we want them to do.
Thank you. Dr. Volpe, would you like to comment on what you're seeing?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I have to just join in the party to say thank you. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the invitation. So, look, we knew before COVID there were some trends that were very troubling in our kids. Anxiety and depression had been increasing. Especially vulnerable were the iGen, those born in the mid to late 90s. Anxiety, depression, suicide rates, hospital visits, all were on the increase. And then COVID came, which was like a wrecking ball for so many of them. More and more really relying on a need for services, many services that were not obtainable in the community. It's unfortunate Dr. Foyer is not here, but you know, the need to get to services has become so important that big organizations like Northwell have partnered with some school districts because the needs are so great. So in the context of doing school psychology 30 years and from being in private practice, there's absolutely been a real change. I believe it was Dr. Calderon, you had mentioned some angry kids, frustration, the failing trend. What we learned from COVID was that you need live instruction. You need the entertainment of a teacher. And there are certain factions of our students, certain groups of kids who are really vulnerable. I've been a specialist for ADHD for about 28 years, and I can tell you, if any group needed live entertainment, instruction, it was this group. And so what I found is that we're seeing more kids coming in with what we call comorbidities, so more things lining up with other things. So we do see more defiance lining up, more anxiety lining up, and certainly more depression lining up with conditions like ADHD. But overall, the anxiety levels are high, not only in our kids, but also our parents and our educators, yes, because there's a big concern, especially when you hear about spikes in suicide rates, especially among like middle school girls you mentioned earlier. I mean, that's a troubling trend. We're not typically seeing those rates that high among kids that young. And that's even the CDC has cited some very, very disturbing statistics with suicide in very young people. So it certainly highlights the need for more help.
Thank you. So you see the wide range of populations and the impact of pre and post-COVID and where we are now. So let's go through what executive functioning is, what's its implications and outcomes for education. Panelists? Dr. Palmer, would you like to comment?
Got the mic. There we go. So one of the executive functions is to have enough working memory to turn on the microphone.
Yes, yes, real life skills.
Exactly. You know, I'm an overall proponent of direct instruction. So whether it is focused on executive functions, whether it's focused on SEL skills, I don't think it's reasonable to believe that every child will develop these skills just by being alive. And then you bring along a pandemic and we lock them in their rooms and on TVs and things like that and cut out their social interactions. And there's even more of a reason to believe that they're not going to just develop those skills. So I'm a proponent of teaching SEL, executive functioning, engagement strategies for all children across the board, and then having that kind of second tier of specialized skills for students who are particularly struggling with those areas.
Thank you. So just so making sure that our attendees here are clear, can someone from the panel maybe give an example or explain what is executive functioning, what is social emotional learning, and what does it look like in the classroom?
I'll start with executive functioning. So I'm going to quote Dr. Thomas Brown, where executive function, think in terms of a music conductor. Okay, and regardless of their expertise, musicians need a competent conductor who will select the piece to play, make sure they start playing the same time and stay on tempo, fade in the strings, bring in the brass, and manage them as they interpret the music. So we are born with this executive brain, and we're very fortunate to be the only species that has this very developed brain. But think about what the executive brain does. It brings together all of these very important skills. So the ability to get started, initiate, the ability to remember what to do, working memory. It's literally memory put to work. The ability to resist distraction and stay on what you started. It's like opening up a bunch of windows and forgetting which ones you started opening with. And you know, the fact is, when it comes down to planning, organization, these are the Achilles heel when it comes to, you know, especially those who have deficits in this area, like, for example, ADHD, which is essentially a condition of delay in executive functions. But as far as the need for these skills, we are born with them. We are given this brain, but I agree, it has to be nurtured. They have to be, it's like planting the seeds. So unless a child is interacting with peers, interacting with teachers who provide amazing opportunities to develop and fine-tune executive functions, that is really where this becomes so important. And we found certainly when people were away from their peers, we saw major regression in those areas.
Thank you. And how about social emotional learning in the classroom? What does that look like?
Well, I think it's actually creating activities where students can express their feelings, where the teacher is checking in with the students, where, you're having discussions about decision-making and how to use self-talk to regulate behavior and different strategies and tools. But I just wanted to share that I think that kids always struggled with these things, and they just kind of exacerbated. I don't think that we ever really dedicated enough time to nurture those particular skills, in my opinion. I think that many of the teachers, even now, are parents. It's easier to prescribe medication sometimes than to take that time out when you have a classroom full of kids that have multiple issues going on in that classroom, to say, did you go check with the neurologist? Did you get the prescription for Johnny? It's easier. And I think even for parents sometimes it is, unfortunately. But I do think that we need to take the time out to really, build those relationships, take a step back a little bit from the academics, and really deal with the emotions. Because if we don't take that time out, I don't think that learning could really happen. You have to address the behavior first.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into what New York State Education Department says about the benchmarks of social emotional learning. It says that 1, develop self-awareness and self-management skills essential to success in school and life. 2, use social awareness and interpersonal skills to establish and maintain positive relationships. 3, demonstrate ethical decision-making skills and develop responsible behaviors in personal, school, and community settings. So if there's a lack in social emotional learning and output from students, talk to us about how you think teachers are perceiving social emotional learning and what measures need to be taken so that way they might embrace it more if they're not.
So we're finding that our teachers more than ever have demonstrated their ability to be resilient and to be able to make those necessary adjustments and modifications to support the students that are presented before them. The social emotional learning competencies that were published in 2018, which was right before the pandemic, were modified more recently in 2022. And while teachers may not necessarily be able to cite verbatim what those competencies are, they are certainly embedding and incorporating them in their day-to-day pedagogy and practice. I can think of one teacher in particular who, at the onset of every school year, realized that students really lacked that executive functioning and weren't able to contribute to collaborative, rich, robust conversations in the classroom. So instead of just doing the typical icebreakers in the beginning of the school year, she took the time out to have students play games, engage with one another, do that team building, and really build those executive functioning skills. Likewise, I can think of a second grade teacher who charges her students with the responsibility of utilizing a rubric to keep track of their respective progress and a checklist to make sure that they're on task. And that's also a part of executive functioning. What's nice about the New York State Next Generation Learning Standards in ELA and math is that there are a lot of opportunities for students to engage in executive function building as well as embracing social emotional learning competencies. So while yes, we do take the time to check in with our students and we do take the time to have those conversations with them to make sure that we are utilizing the language of instruction with respect to SEL, we are also understanding that it's not something that can be taught in isolation. It's very much embedded in all that we do, and it's very much a part of the day-to-day curriculum, instruction, teaching, and learning.
Thank you. Dr. Calderon?
So I think that what I hear you say is that teachers are really understanding that SEL is not a curriculum area.
Correct.
Right? SEL is the environment
Yes.
in which we're teaching. And this is really important because And I really love what you said about the metaphor of executive functioning in terms of the music piece. So Barclay says it in a little bit drier way, right? So when Barclay describes executive functioning, he's talking about self-regulation to the environment, right? The ability to choose a goal, work towards a goal, and then self-regulate my actions, my emotions, the way that I think about how to achieve the goals, and then self-regulate in an environment. Now, the problem is, particularly with the pandemic, but certainly happened before, when the environment is in upheaval, that's when the child will have a harder time to self-regulate. And what I hear you say, which is so encouraging to me, is that teachers are recognizing that and are working with children, even as young as second graders, to give them opportunities to practice that type of self-regulation.
Absolutely.
And that's key.
And I think also an important component that we've not discussed is the parent's role. There are executive functioning checklists that start as early as 3 through higher ed. And it's important for parents to be informed as to what to do to support their children with respect to building executive functioning.
Do you think that's an area that we need improvement on in being able to supply that information to parents as well as to educators in this area?
Absolutely. I think it's important for us to elicit the support of our community organizations and also the medical field. We have many students who do not have access to adequate health care. So unfortunately, their parents are not understanding or unaware that they're missing important developmental milestones until they get to school. So in order to highlight those concerns, it's important for us to make sure that we are bridging partnerships with the home, the school, and the greater community.
Any other comments on that?
I like what Dr. Jackson said, that our teachers really do try, their hardest to implement social emotional learning. But I think that I see the other end a little bit more because I'm, over special education. So it's the extreme cases of kids where, they're exhibiting aggressive behavior or, they're unable to completely self-regulate. So I see the other end a little bit more, and I think that's the challenge. It's the kids with the extreme behaviors, and when I mention medication, I think sometimes it's easier for teachers to reach out to the parents and, encourage them to go to the neurologist or for parents to seek medication. But I think that if we take a little bit, a step back and really build those relationships with the kids, even those kids with the extreme issues are reachable. And those are the children that I'm most concerned. It's when it's extreme cases, when just those interventions are not enough.
I agree, and I echo much of what Rhonda has said with respect to extreme behaviors, and we've certainly seen our fair share of them post-pandemic. And one of the concerns, and also something that we need to bring advocacy to, is releasing the stigma that's associated with mental health and ensuring that parents understand that it's okay to seek support and have their children get services that are well needed.
Very good point, absolutely. Now we know that New York State has tier 1, 2, and 3 interventions, with tier 1 being the universal tier of intervention. Talk to us about how social emotional learning, how executive functioning, and overall mental health interventions can fit into this universal tier.
That is the place for all this. It is some training in SEL, knowledge about what mental wellness and mental health is, must be delivered to all students. It's the universal. That lays the foundation for anything that goes beyond that, other interventions. Somebody once said to me, there's too much to do in school, my plate's full. It was pointed out that SEL really is the plate that everything else has to go on. So we have to work in this realm, tier 1.
So where's the breakdown? Why is it universal? Oh, SEL's first for everyone. Where do you think that went wrong?
So I think where it went right is turn back the clock 3 years ago, and you were starting to see a slow evolution of people in schools recognizing that SEL skills had to be taught. You know, if you go back 30 years, teaching, I remember a social studies teacher who was already a 30-year teacher said, we used to teach the virtues to children. You know, children had to learn the virtues in school. Early in my career, it was character education. We were seeing a slow evolution of a recognition that these skills had to be taught to students. Along comes the pandemic, we get this big gray spot because of lack of interaction. But I think the silver lining in that cloud is that people, school people, parents, community people recognize now more than ever that SEL is important, and we need to deliver that in schools.
Do you think that No Child Left Behind put a dent in that progression for SEL?
I don't know. I don't know that it did or it didn't. I think that its focus on improving academics probably helped schools in lots of ways that probably got ripped down by parents and educators concerned about testing and missed the whole benefit of the law. Any
other thoughts on that?
It was too much focus on testing, high-stakes testing, and, you know. I also think, though, the bigger issue is the lack of wraparound services and support.
Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I think that, you know, you're in school, the students getting counseling services, you know, but there's no services when they go home. So I think that a lot of parents struggle with getting mental health services for their child. Finding a doctor sometimes could take a long time. Many schools have actually went into partnerships with Northwell Health, which they don't have the capacity to serve Brentwood right now, but we're praying that that happens soon. But I think that we do need wraparound support services. We have to help parents be able to access services for their children, and that's a big problem. The school's taken on a great deal of responsibility, yes, but then they go home. Yeah. And if it's no consistency with that home-school connection, then we're not really fully helping the child, you know?
So, go ahead.
So, we see that so much, and we've been seeing is really for decades, regardless of the pandemic, and that's why I think it's so important to revisit this model of the school community model. So the school community model, right, and this is nothing new. I mean, I learned about it when I was in school, and that was a long time ago. But the school community model suggests that there's a collaboration, a partnership between school and community resources that the school is housed in order to remove barriers for learning. And that can include health, such as what Northwell Initiative is doing in the schools. That can include accessibility to low-cost mental health services. That can include partnership with, for a little bit older children, businesses in town for extracurricular learning opportunities and engagement in pro-social opportunities in the community. That can include support for parents in terms of parenting skills, citizenship classes, so important, to foster the parents' feeling that they're part of the community, because I see very often in the families that we deal with, parents are very suspicious of the schools, right? So a parent will bring a child in for an assessment, and one of the things that we want to do is we want to get obviously the school's perspective. Mm-hmm. No, I don't want the school to know that I'm doing the assessment. I don't want input from the school. Why is that? There is a sense of disconnect, mm-hmm, yes, between the family and the school. There's a sense of distrust, yes, for some reason, of the establishment. And if we go back to the school community model, there's a much better chance of a collaboration, right? It goes back to the old adage, it takes, what does it take? It takes a village to raise a child.
Agreed. Yeah. So am I hearing to address the needs of children who are saying, I'm dumb and I can't, and they don't believe in themselves, and they have that academic achievement gap of 1, 2, 3 years in a gen ed classroom even, am I hearing that the community, the way that we speak with the community, the services that we provide, as well as the parent information and education, along with systemized social emotional learning programs, as well as then built on self-regulation strategies to be used within the classroom. Is that what I'm hearing, that will then address some of those needs, thereby decreasing the mental health concerns?
Yeah, I will comment on the fact that I think there is no doubt a greater recognition of the importance of emotion in just about everything people do. If anything positive came from the pandemic, it was a recognition that people's emotional well-being is a high priority. And everything we do and everything we create and all the things that we want to systematically put together to help people be productive are predicated on people's emotional well-being. I know that there are some schools recognize this. I know in Farmingdale we did, and I'm not looking to sell his book. Permission to Feel was a book written by Mark Brackett. And interestingly, he uses this ruler model, recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotion, ruler. But what's interesting is that things like a mood meter, a classroom charter, ways to help kids and adults identify emotion, to put them in a good space. And literally, it's like a colored chart of different ranging from red if you're angry and whatnot. Now, I know on the surface it sounds like, oh, it sounds like stuff that's been around for years. But in reality, integrating it into curriculum, we've actually seen teachers doing this. And, you know, recognizing emotions start everything. If we get to that, we get to everything else. But we also need to include parents in that. And I agree, a partnership is critical. So if we could focus on that and continue to focus on that, it can't be everything, but it has to be part of the equation.
So how important is it, Dr. Volpe, for educators to be trained to recognize certain signs and symptoms and then intervene, so thereby giving the children, their students, the ability to label or what coping skills that they need? Talk to us on that.
Well, the fact is, I'll go back to what Dr. Calderon said, that, you know, Barkley and others have talked about the importance of self-regulation, self-management. You mentioned self-talk. Right? So if we're going to help kids become independent and productive in society, look, society is based on our ability to control our emotion. If in fact I get angry and I show anger everywhere, the world is going to tolerate me less and less as I get older. If I don't learn how to reel in and inhibit those negative emotions, that's going to be critical. So to me, that has to be a big part of it. The frustration with learning, the frustration with peers, you know, and again, this has all been exacerbated with the whole COVID thing and people getting kind of reorganized. You know, it's been a tough situation, but we do need to build this in. I would agree, and again, partnering with parents, teachers, talk about emotions, talking about the SEL factors, you know, the programs. CARES is another one. It teaches cooperation, assertion, responsibility, empathy, self-control. Those are two big ones that have really been, you know, out there for people to help. And parents can understand this stuff. And then when their kids come home, they're in a good space, perhaps, to try to bring them to a good space to want to do work.
So that's a good demonstration of how we were talking about at the beginning of this evening with the purpose of the panel, right? Getting funding for professional learning experiences, being able to have curriculum change. That would be a demonstration for why we need those types of changes now within education.
Lisa, if I may also, there's a need to increase the capacity to serve. We have wonderful partnerships with community organizations. I have a wonderful administrative team, guidance counselor, social worker, who work closely with families to try to access appointments, but the wait list is long. Neurologists, sometimes it could take upwards of 6 months to get an appointment. Outside counseling, sometimes it could take weeks to get someone on the phone, and then another 6 to 8 weeks to get an appointment. So just bringing advocacy to capacity to serve is just a much needed.
Absolutely. And how do we get there? And that's really up for a very important discussion, because that capacity is not there and the need is. So how do we close that gap as well?
Yeah, can I? The issue of the accessibility to services, if we're thinking about it from the collaborative point of view, and we're bringing the services into the school rather than sending the families out there to forage for services where they may find it, then we're going to have a much better chance of identifying those needs early on and offering interventions that are going to be effective in the right place, in the right time. So again, this collaboration of the community is key. And I know there are initiatives, and Dr. Palmer, maybe you can speak to that in terms of the BOCES initiative to foster this type of partnership.
Sure. I think by default, schools have become the place of treatment for many children, the place of health care for many children. It has gotten much worse in recent years. There's a shortage of mental health providers. If anybody has, mental health providers particularly who are willing to work with children. So if any of you are parents, have tried to get services for your children, a psychologist, a social worker, a mental health counselor, you know how difficult it is to get an appointment. So schools have really taken on more and more of the role. We mentioned before the Northwell collaborations that they're doing with many schools. There's a number of other community organizations that are doing collaborations with schools to bring those services in as well. The hope here is we need to bridge a gap. There are some bigger issues that I think you started to allude to is we really need to take a public health approach to this. We need to encourage more people to go into the mental health field as professionals. I think that's probably a role that the state needs to take on, looking to how to encourage that growth in that field. Because, I spent the beginning of my career trying to encourage families, get over this stigma, go get your child help, take those steps. Now I'm almost afraid to do that with a family because I know when they leave, if they're really geared up and they're going to go try to get help, they may not find it. They may not be able to afford it. They may be on wait lists for months and months. So some of those collaborations are happening. They began in Nassau County. They're spreading out to Suffolk County now as well. In Nassau County, the BOCES formed a mental health consortium to provide additional training to school mental health professionals and teachers so that they can build their skill sets as well, and that's been really helpful.
Well, that's what you just said, teachers, because as teachers, we have our students who have all these symptoms and challenges, and we're not always trained to be able to help them. So if we are, and I'm not saying therapy or counseling, but if we are trained to find the symptoms and identify them early, even in preschool, then building up those skills might eliminate the need for that absence capacity that we need because of our needs are so high, which then also could be supported by multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration, not even communication, right? Collaboration between mental health staff and with the related service providers and with educators. So what exactly do I mean by that, Dr. Calderon?
Thank you, Lisa. You're speaking about something that's very dear to my heart. If we think about it, everything that we've heard tonight and what the audience knows and what my colleagues here are talking about, we're really talking about different disciplines that are involved in helping our children to succeed. We're talking about educators, we're talking about psychologists, we're talking about doctors, neurologists, psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. That's the multidisciplinary piece, but that's a silo model, right? Everybody does what they know what to do, but they don't necessarily talk to each other in order to come up with a comprehensive understanding of what's going on with that child and how each one of these professionals can contribute to achieve the same set of goals. We need a change in approach. We need to think about interdisciplinary collaboration where the different professionals are talking to each other and learning from each other. Right before the panel started, we were talking about this. As a psychologist, I can come up with amazing evidence-based interventions based on the assessment that I conduct with the client or that I teach my students to conduct with the client, right? Fantastic. I bring that to the teacher who now has 20, 25, 30 other kids in the classroom, and they say, I can't do that. This is not feasible for me. It's important as a psychologist to learn from the teachers what is practical, right? It's important for the teacher to learn from the psychologist what is the etiology of what is going on with that child. It's important for everybody to understand from the neurologist, is this really a neurodevelopmental disorder here? We're talking a lot about executive functioning that we typically think about ADHD, but executive functioning can be impaired because of other reasons, right? Depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to have that kind of conversation. Now, you want to know how we achieve it, right, Lisa?
That's right.
That's the question.
That's right.
Assemblyman Smith, you're right in my line of vision. Advocacy and funding.
Yes.
Advocacy and funding, that's what we need to. We also need to, assessment. Assessment is key, and I see my students, they are chuckling already when I talk about assessment is key. But it's really important in order to understand what is the etiology of what is the source, what is the reason that the child, the student is experiencing these problems. But assessment is so expensive. We need to advocate for legislation that will allow reasonable coverage by insurance companies for assessment. We need to allow for more funding for a more comprehensive assessment in the school building. We need to provide resources for clinics like the one that I run that is university-based to collaborate with schools and other community-based organizations in order to provide low-cost services.
And through the assessments, they can qualify for services, but yet there's such valuable information in those assessments for the school-related personnel, yes?
Yes, absolutely. Such valuable information that can come from it. But again, you know, the end...
So let me add for 1 second. So educators, based on those assessments that happen so often in schools, right? Do you think that the results are being maximized and trickled down to functional strategies and interventions, and oh, that's why that's happening in my class, kind of communication? Do you think that's happening?
I see it happening on a daily basis as far as teachers formatively and summatively assessing their students to see where they are with respect to their progress, and then also students self-assessing as well. What is happening, though, is that there is such a marked difference between where students are and where they are expected to be with respect to their age and grade level expectation, that it does affect their overall mental health, and it does exhibit behaviors in the classroom, and it does impede the learning process. So it's certainly multifaceted.
Multifaceted, absolutely. And what about from the assessment itself from mental health provider? From whether it be an outside agency and they send in their report to the school district, or it's done through the school district, are we finding that that information is really being communicated right down to the teacher?
So what I happen to find, in my experience, is that we do sign consent for communication between the outside service provider and the school. The teacher does take their part in providing information as far as how the child is doing at home, which is somehow a different portrayal as to what the parents are identifying, what they're seeing at home, and then the reports are generated. There may or may not be a CPSC or a CSC meeting, and then there may or not be some services or a diagnosis that is afforded. Teachers play a role in the fact that if there is a committee, if there is a consult for behavior, if there is a need for them to participate in an MTSS or PPS meeting, they're certainly involved to that extent.
Any other comments with that?
I would say that when an assessment is done on the outside, I think psychologists, certainly if it's a psychological, are in a good space to help interpret and bring some of that information to light. So I'll do multiple consultations, with teachers. I'll just call them down, and we'll go over psychiatric or something. Even to this day, like after all these years of doing workshops on ADHD. I'll just pick on that for a minute. People still think, well, come on, I have ADHD too, and why can't he just control himself? And people sometimes really underestimate, or they're just afraid to, or have some denial about this condition. I'm just going to pick on that because that's the one that's been very popular. There's a shortage of medications right now, and so parents can't just jump out and medicate. And even talking about medicine sometimes is, you're opening up a can of worms, although certainly science shows it is an important part of stabilizing executive functions. But the school personnel still become, I would agree, we're more relied on now than ever to translate some of the jargon. And I say in a very meaningful way. I don't sit and want to get into all the data, percentiles, and everything else, but what does it really mean to be disinhibited? What does a high score on an anxiety or a depression scale really mean?
And how does it look in the classroom? What do I do when I see it? When he's out of his seat more than in, and I can't get my work done because he's being distracting, now what? That's the reality of what you're talking about, but translated into our educational world that we haven't been formally trained in unless we decide to go to a course or a workshop.
I agree. I think that it depends on the teacher's classroom that gets that information from the assessment. I find that a lot of my special education staff, or whether it's the psychologists or the special education teachers, especially those teachers that are in, we call it level 4, but in a behavior class, they're often leaned upon by other staff members to interpret that information and to actually help them with tools and strategies. I don't think that we train everybody the same on how to manage behavior. We're working on it now. We're improving our multi-tiered systems of supports for behavior. But I think historically, it's been like a special education show in Brentwood. I think that we did FBAs, BIPs, new referrals, and many of the data that we used was based on reading and math. When we were classifying kids, there weren't really a lot of interventions as it pertains to behavior. Now there's a shift happening, and we're putting a lot more attention on providing those multi-tiered systems of support as it relates to behavior.
Right.
I also think, if I may, that it's important for more schools to adopt the model that you just shared with respect to multiple conversations and communication with the classroom teacher and other building stakeholders to ensure that you're getting valid information regarding the child.
And how important is it for mental health staff to understand the classroom environment and the teachers to understand where the mental health providers are coming from, and vice versa?
It's extremely important for them to know how students are engaging in the content, which is why many educators, many building administrators ensure that the PPS staff is present at every professional learning opportunity. In order for you to support the child with accessing content, regulating his or her emotions, you have to know what the demands are, what the expectations are, and be able to speak to teaching and learning standards.
And what a difference in the field from many, many years ago when I started as a school psychologist. You know, back then, Wexler was still alive. That's a psychology joke for some of you testers out there. The difference to me is amazing. I look at the social workers, psychologists, and counselors I work with. They understand their role is in the classroom as well as in their office. In my early career, I tested, I took kids to my office, counseled them either individually or group, and that was it, unless there was a crisis.
Tell us what that looks like then.
So what does it look like now? So now I have people doing lessons in classrooms, going in, helping teachers plan interventions. They have a very large role in SEL instruction. They run groups in classrooms. They're there more than ever before, and not just to put out fires.
Great. Proactive approach.
Not just in the classroom, but also special area, also lunch, recess.
All areas within
all
the school
areas
environment.
Supporting students.
And now, are your teachers, are they reaching out on a more of an educational level to your mental health providers as they are when they come in? Like, do they say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, and do they collaborate reciprocally?
I would love to tell you yes, 100%, but I would be lying. There has definitely been a significant transition in the number and frequency of teachers collaborating with the mental health providers in the buildings. It's gotten better and better. And, and again, it's another silver lining of COVID, is teachers felt a great deal of social emotional stress, and so they reached out to people, or people reached out to them. So there's much more collaboration than there ever has been before. But no, it's not 100%. You have people either based upon their experience or their personalities who are not comfortable with that. And those are the ones we encourage to do more and more of it.
But there's progress being made and positive outcomes because of that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's all relative to the dynamic makeup of the classroom as well.
Absolutely.
We're also doing the same thing, pushing in. A lot of our related service providers are pushing in. And also, I find that we're meeting more as a team to discuss, better interventions. Yeah.
I think fundamentally teachers are aware that we're on the same team. Literally, we're on the same team. We all want, with parents, success for children. And I do agree. There have been, I found, changes in the levels of collaboration. So I see more teachers now than I've ever seen. And honestly, even speaking with parents, and getting parents to call back, and it's like they're so glad to be able to talk to a psychologist, and so our role has become a much more active role than several years ago, where we were just testing. It's a complete change in the dynamic, for sure.
But there is a level of frustration, too, that I'm seeing.
Yes, and this is what we are addressing here tonight, too, and that's the I can't, I'm dumb, and what do I do? How do I reach and connect with this child? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of frustration when you have students, and I mean, we're seeing some pretty aggressive young students. I see a lot of aggression and suspensions coming from maybe preschool to second grade in that area that we never saw before. In the general ed setting, we're seeing more kids, believe it or not potty trained in the kindergarten, So we're seeing a lot of behaviors that we typically didn't see, and I think that the teachers are like, what do I do with this kid?
Sure.
I don't know what to do. And so they're seeking help, but with them seeking help, I see the number of new referrals increasing. So I don't know. I mean, I think we're on the right track by, creating multi-tiered systems of supports. I think, having that committee and really having a system in place where we're not always going to exclusionary disciplinary techniques, where we're coming up with ideas to really address the behaviors and the needs and offer kids the tools to be able to navigate throughout the school environment, and offer more workshops and supports for parents. Because I really think that we have to do something about that. Even before the kids start kindergarten, and from preschool to kindergarten, having some type of a support over the summer where parents can come in and we can offer support and potty training or, whatever. But we don't even know what's going on with a lot of these kids, which is very unfortunate. They came back, so many of them don't even talk. We have so many kids that don't have verbal communication skills. We actually, more than ever, we're ordering PECS devices for students.
Explain to our attendees here what that is.
It's a picture exchange communication device, so it's for students that are nonverbal, and they could use pictures and different devices to communicate. So we're seeing that more than ever right now, and I think it's because of the lack of social skills during the pandemic. People wearing the mask, kids are you go into the store and you see the little kids and they're in strollers and they're actually going through cell phones and they know where they're going on the cell phone. So it's a different world, but I think they're watching kids play on technology more than they're playing with each other. The video games, they're playing with the kid in another state or another country. I mean, so it's a different world, and I think that we definitely have to come together. You're right. I mean, we don't have the support, for mental health the way that we would like to. So we're going to have to change the way we do things in school, where we offer more support with the teachers. I think general education teachers are going to have to get used to having kids in their class that are not typical. I think you can't classify everybody, and there's a lot of kids with extreme behaviors right now. So I think educating teachers, offering support where they can, kind of work with some of the students in the class would limit the amount of new referrals, and I think it will help kids.
And making it okay from top down to take that approach within the classroom, because we still have those same standards and we still have those same state tests. So from the top down, communicating that this is really what we need to address first is very important. And then that would be something that we could explore at another time, as well as what does the state expect from us academically? And where does that lie in with our needs now, right? So at this point, I think it would be really advantageous of us to hear from all of you. Who has a question that you would like to ask the panelists? Or thoughts that you would like to share? We spoke about a lot here.
Yeah, anybody who would like to ask a few questions. First of all, round of applause for our panel and for Lisa. What a wonderful presentation. So yeah, let's have some open floor discussion. Anybody? Yes, here you go. If you could just, Lisa, what did you want everybody to kind of state when they...
If you could just remember to say your name, role, organization, and your question.
Hello, my name's Emilicia Almanasi. I'm a school psychologist at Oak Park Elementary in Brentwood School District. My question is, we talked a lot about having a positive social-emotional environment, but we also talked about how the social-emotional needs have risen. I feel like a lot of demands. Teachers are aware of, obviously, their students that have these extreme behaviors. So I'm more than willing to work with them, but I'm only one person. So sometimes in one class something's happening and I'm in another class and things like that. So as a tier, some classes are fine, but as a tier 2 or a tier 3, we talked about that explicit curriculum of social emotional learning. And I feel like it's needed for some students as a preventative measure. What do you think, where do you lie on that, in that kind of explicit teaching? Kind of like a push-in, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be in a special education classroom, more of in a gen ed.
Well, I know Ms. Palmer is here right now, and at the at the elementary level, she's actually bringing in curriculum, social emotional learning curriculum for the teachers, and I think that's also being shared with the related service providers. We do have some psychologists that push into the classrooms, and we are doing stuff like that. I'm not opposed to it if it's working, yes. But you're only one person. We have a limited number of psychologists in the district, so to me, I think it's high time that everyone get trained on how to respond to behavior and what kind of strategies that they can introduce students to. I don't think we could function where it's only the job of the special educators, yes, or the psychologists or the social workers. Everyone has to get on the same page.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Who else has a question?
We'll go over here, and then we'll come over there. Good to see you.
Hi, my name is Matt Maduri. I'm with the Messenger papers. We have headlines in Brooklyn, Islip, and Smithtown. This question is actually for you, Ms. Navarra, but the panel can substantiate if they're able to. In the beginning of the presentation, you said that 32% of combined ADHD kids drop out of high school, and 50 to 70% are rejected by close friends by second grade. Would you be able to elaborate on the statistics of that study? I mean, is that local, or are they reflective of the national numbers? What was the timeline of the study?
Okay, so that was from Dr. Russell Barkley with the 50 through 70% are rejected by a close friend. And essentially, it's their skills in which children who have ADHD, if they are hyperactive and impulsive, oftentimes they don't have that filter, as lots of people say. So they respond emotionally, and it's that component in which really turns children away from building stronger relationships with that particular child. Whereas in comparison, the child who is also forgetful, it's not so much that symptom, it's the emotional component. As for the 32% of the combined type, you know, as we've spoken about here this evening with the difficulties in preschool and how it's already been, you know, established and existing, if children's needs are not met in the way that they need to, oftentimes when they're hyperactive, we're telling them I actually just read a great resource for if you want to learn about ADHD is Attitude, ADDITUDE, right? So even I just read today the 10 things that every ADHD kid has heard, and it's one of those types of things where they say, sit down, why can't you? Why can't you remember? Just do it, right? So when these repeated behaviors that really impact this child who has an invisible disability, because it's not physical. When we look at them, they look like they are developing like any other child at their grade and their age. And so it's these compounding experiences then that lead to that school failure that we started in the beginning. And then they don't have the capacity or support to keep up with the high school demands, and they oftentimes just give up.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Can I just add to that? I'm just going to add something to that regarding ADHD. So ADHD right now is best looked at as a disorder of self-regulation. The classic model focusing on hyperactivity, which actually accounts for a very small percentage. Self-control and self-regulation is the core of what ADHD is. But the data has become very clear. And I started early on in my practice working with adults. At that time, they were coming in diagnosed with anxiety and depression when really they had ADHD. And in fact, as it turns out, when you look at the current data on how it impacts adults, this is why it's so important that we get to people early. And teachers may be the starting point of identifying those kids if they know what to look for. As adults, the data are pretty clear. Dropout rates, comorbid substance abuse, accidents, motor vehicle accidents, impulsive emotionality. That is something that's really neglected. Being impulsive emotionally, you know, people will tolerate you if you're tapping your pencil, but if you act out in aggression and frustration because somebody cuts you in line, that's what's going to contribute. So social rejection is very common among the ADHD clientele. So, you know, identifying is key, and that's why when we talk about early intervention for a lot of conditions, it can set the stage for productivity and success later on. If we miss it, as oftentimes with adults who come in saying, I know I had it, you know, someone's saying my kid has it. And that's how a lot of people end up in my offices, you know, and so it's important. So yes, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad side effects.
And 25% of adults in substance abuse programs have ADHD. And their medical bills are higher in comparison than to those who don't have, as well as being able to maintain a job, being able to maintain relationships as adults. So that's why it is so important to understand as educators, what are we looking at? Why we have the symptoms here, but what do I do? Do I teach? Are you going to teach me? Or do we just focus on the curriculum? So this is why we're all here together to try and address those behaviors. Great question. Thank you for that.
Thank you both, appreciate it.
Great question. All right. Head over to this side.
Hi, I'm Paris Pappas. I'm a mom, really a conscientious mom here. I'm also a medical provider. I've dealt with pediatrics for a long time. I think it's interesting and baffling at the same time how we really have an epidemic of ADHD. And instead of like trying to find the root cause of what's happening, we're trying to really make an institutional type setting more appropriate for them, which really doesn't work. And I know you guys probably all know this. I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure. So I guess my real question is, what are you guys doing to figure out if our actual school system, the way it's set up right now with this current epidemic, right, of ADHD, is working for these children, especially if you have 30% say, and sometimes I think that might be right on key, about 30%, in a classroom that they're needing to sit for 8 hours, or other situations where they're not really comfortable and they're not thriving. When are we going to embrace, if we are going to embrace this and not have like separate schools with real, not medication, but real like school situations that are going?
What is your name?
Paris.
Paris?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, executive skill training.
But psychiatrists and neurologists coming into schools is not, I don't really, I don't want
Self-talk, perception, cognitive skills within their own classroom. Dr. Volker.
I just wanted to share, we are doing different out-of-the-box kind of things. We're bringing in assistive technology for some students that suffer from ADHD. So like sit and stand desk, reverb watches, refocusing watches, the watches go off that, if the kid is distracted. The light, there's something called light sound. Sound can throw a child off. So we're looking at different techniques, and different devices to help students regulate as well. I think we also have Ms. Navarra. She actually pushes in as a behavior specialist into many of our classes, and she's teaching students different tools and strategies that they can use to regulate their behavior. So I think just different things. We're trying all different things, restorative practice, like all different things before it gets to the level of a neurologist. We're trying to meet the kids with tier 1 and tier 2 interventions first. Now, when the behaviors are extreme, then obviously we pull in reinforcements.
Right.
But we're trying to support kids in the school now.
So I understand, I can appreciate your, the light thing you were talking about, but I'm thinking to myself, that's going to isolate that kid even more. No one wants some weird beeping computer in front of them when they are in a school.
They love it, by the way. The sit and stand desk are a hot item. Everybody wants them. Because kids have a hard time sitting still for a long period of time. With ADHD, they want to move. So that kid is able to, you could put and I think Miss Rebecca Rodriguez is here, and because she was one of the first teachers that actually put some of these devices in our classroom, and I'm telling you, they're phenomenal. Kids want them.
Okay, just another 2 cents in that video we watched in the beginning when one of the child was saying how, she's so upset because she gets in trouble and she has to give up her recess. There's been studies out for the last 30 years that more recess is really what these kids need, less, teaching to testing. And so I just want to put my 2 cents in that if we're going to really get the root cause, we really need to let these kids be kids a little bit more, a little bit less institution, a little bit more play. And I think it'll be a lot better off for humanity and society as a whole, right?
Yep.
Can I just jump in for 2 seconds? Just to add to that, just as an answer too, because at the state level, I'm very happy to see we're finally, when you go back to 2014 where Common Core was the top issue, and I see a lot of heads nodding, and we really, and it was a parent-led movement that kind of pulled the state in the right direction. The Board of Regents even shifted focus where you had, and now this is my opinion, but I think a lot of people in education would agree that focusing on public schools, having champions of public schools on the Board of Regents as opposed to other interests, I think was a big shift that now we've seen. So I do think, albeit slow, and it is a lot quicker at the district level to see these actual direct day-to-day changes. At the state level, myself and some of my colleagues on both sides, Republican, Democrat, I think are looking at moving away from, you see the Board of Regents is contemplating moving away from mandating the Regents exams and saying, could we do something different? Yeah, so there is, I feel like there's definitely a meaningful shift coming. It's a little slow, and obviously that's not helpful when our children, my daughter's now 4, so if you have kids in the schools now, you'd like to see a change sooner rather than later, but I do feel like we're moving in that direction, so hopefully that's helpful. And the folks here tonight are actively advocating to legislators like myself about these needs as well, so thanks for coming.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm from Moms for Liberty. And my question to you is, Dr. Volpe, is that your name? Volpe, sorry. You mentioned before about having relationships with the teachers and the social workers, and you guys are all united. But what about the parents? Because I feel like there's really a lack of communication with parents and transparency from districts, all over the island and across New York State as a whole, with the transparency that's actually what's being taught to the child in school versus what the parent is being told at home. So what is, where are we at with the parents being involved as well?
It's a great point. I'm just going to speak for myself and my own interactions in the Farmingdale district. The parents are a major player. When we reach out to a guardian, one of the first things I do, I'm just speaking for myself, and obviously my colleagues, we kind of follow a similar vein. There are 4 psychologists in Farmingdale High School. Reaching out to parents is a priority for us, because we know if you don't respond to an email, if you don't make the call, you lose trust. So that's number 1. Number 2, as far as the teachers, I will serve as a go-in-between oftentimes, where if a teacher is unable to get back or having a hard time getting back, or there's a breakdown, I find myself right in the middle of that sometimes, especially for kids who are classified or kids who have 504 accommodations. You know, I want to make sure that we all come out looking good here. And the one thing I don't tolerate is a lack of communication. I don't like it when people don't get back to my emails, and people will hear it if they don't, especially people who work with me. So as a parent and with kids, having gone through the school systems, I want to make sure you're a very active participant. So if I mentioned before that when I could call a parent, to me, I'm right at the source. Right. And if I can offer any kind of help and strategy, a lot of times I'll just say, look, I just met your child. Here's what I understand is going on. What are you seeing? Just that 10, 15-minute conversation changes that whole course of my relationship with that parent. Mm-hmm. So I hope I didn't underestimate the influence of the parent earlier.
Absolutely. No, communication cuts off the head of all types of, discrepancies. The other thing is that most parents aren't even aware what SEL is, social emotional learning. So when are we going to start giving the information out to the parents so they understand what social emotional learning is, why this is being taught in the schools, why are the children learning this starting in kindergarten? This is the communication that I believe the parents are lacking and they don't get from the school. Now, it's not necessarily the counselor's job, to let the community know what's going on, but the superintendents of the schools, the principals, or whatever it may be, the communication needs to happen, and a lot of parents from, that I'm in communication with have no idea what social emotional learning is.
Well, I'm proud to announce that we are conducting our first parent workshop for social emotional learning this upcoming Friday. Yes. Because we do recognize the importance of having parents involved, making sure that they understand what their children are being immersed in throughout the school day, and that we're also, as a school, being supportive of them and that they know that we're a resource.
That's excellent, and that's at Brentwood?
Yes.
And can anybody attend that, or is it just for Brentwood parents?
Well, this upcoming workshop is for Twin Pines Elementary School families.
Okay.
But I'm certainly open to opening up doors and having some inter-district visitation.
Excellent,
with
thank you.
With permission from our assistant superintendent.
Lisa, can I add to that? Working as a school superintendent for a lot of years, my best suggestion is parents go directly to their school district with that request. Please do a workshop on SEL and explain the basis of it, because that will get attention. Then you have to be careful of the build it and they won't come phenomena. Because, all of you parents who have seen workshops in your district know that often when you go, there's not many people. So you got to get the turnout of parents, so your district is then encouraged to do that over and over again. But I think specific requests for workshops go a long way in school districts.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I represent parents and administrators through Save Our Schools. I have to say, Superintendent or Special Ed Director Young, right, at the end? Mm-hmm. A lot of what you said is like a breath of fresh air. So I'm an inner city kid, and I grew up in the boroughs and socioeconomically depressed, and then went on to teach in the same type of environment that I grew up in. And I will have to agree with Bree that the need for parents to be involved is paramount, because I dealt with students, I'm an educator, administrator, the whole 9 yards, and if we don't understand the family, there's only so much we can do. So we have situations that no matter how much we try to use an interdisciplinary measure, it's not going to happen because they need it at home. So getting those parents there at those workshops is really critical. Having surveys on kids and trying to figure out their mindset from K through 12 is almost, as Paris had said, institutionalizing the situation. And that's the last thing we want. I love that you said medication needs to stop, but if we bring in all of these psychologists and these social workers, where are they going to push them? I think it's a blessing that you don't have Northwell Health right now, and I'm happy that they said they don't have anybody for you, because I'm not so sure you need them. You know, you have the largest school district, I think, in the state, 18,000 students, right? A majority of them, close to 17,000 at Title I. You're getting major funds, and ARP, I think it was 64 million was given to Brentwood. So I'm not sure advocacy and funds may always be the answer. I think what we need is parent and community outreach, and understanding the family dynamics makes a huge difference. I had one grandmother I'll never forget. Kid was, you know, broken home. Mother was there, in and out. Grandmother was the one in charge. And she put him in the Alvin Ailey School of Dance because she just didn't know what else to do. And this kid thrived. Thrived. That's what you need. Get in touch with the family. I don't really ever bother talking unless I needed to in an extreme situation. Go to that guidance counselor. I would always reach out to the parents first. So please, 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 let's get those parents involved.
Can I respond to the parent involvement piece? I think it's something that we struggle with all the time, but one of the things that I wanted to share is in many cases with kids that are chronic, the behavior is chronic, a lot of the parents are in denial. And so how do you bridge that, you know, gap right there, where you're seeing as a teacher or an administrator in the building, you're seeing these behaviors that are alarming, but the parent is kind of like against the school, so there's that distrust. So I think that's a big issue that we're faced with in Brentwood. And when I say that we need funding and support, it's more for the wraparound services. Many of the parents don't have insurance. So when I'm saying the schools need support, I'd like to purchase the services after school hours so that when parents need it. In fact, we're talking to PM Pediatrics, and I would like to bridge that gap so then after school there's services available if a student needs support.
And also, as a side note, for parent workshops, I also think that it's very important that what teachers learn, parents learn. So, and then what happens is the child goes home and says, you know what I learned? And you're like, yeah, I know, I get it. You know, even on positive praise, how to praise your child so it's not fixed and it's a growth mindset. So I think aligning the parent workshops along with new teacher training on a regular basis is really what you're looking for, not just isolated parent workshops, because you want it to be from school to home and home to school because the child's right in the middle, right? So I think maybe that's a big picture right there to help things along. To consider.
Dana, I'll be right. You guys and Dana's.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jackie, and I'm here as a parent, but I'm also with Moms for Liberty, Nesta West. And you mentioned the Ruler program by Dr. Mark Brackett, and this was a program developed through the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and it's a CASEL accredited program. CASEL's baseline criteria and rationale is based on the following 3 criteria: students' academic success, development and maintenance of cultural competence, and the development of a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of the current social order. And those 3 criteria were developed by Gloria Ladson-Billings in the 90s under the broader term of culturally relevant pedagogy, which was coined by her, actually, according to Learning for Justice, which is formerly Teaching Tolerance. This was developed as a result of Ladson-Billings examining how critical race theory had offered a way to rethink traditional legal scholarship. She uses this to justify bringing critical race theory out of legal scholarship and into K-12 education. And there are many that, of course, say there is no critical race theory present in K-12 schools, but how is that possible when SEL organizations like CASEL have a core that was developed right out of CRT principles?
Can I take that one, maybe? I think you bring up an interesting point. Tonight's topic that we're talking about is not necessarily critical race theory. You know, when we're talking about social emotional learning, as a former educator, I also appreciate that the panel got a chance, in my mind, because I'm an advocate for social emotional learning, But I think most of you who would know me know that what the, I don't want to say buzzword because I'm not trying to minimize it, but what the media might be talking about, critical race theory and a lot of the negative connotations, that's not something that I support, but I do support social emotional learning. So I think when we're talking tonight, I was actually glad that this conversation came up, because I think part of our conversation tonight was to kind of shed light on, what words that are being said often and where that meets practice. Because I think, and the panelists can weigh in if you'd like to, those aspects are not, in practice, social emotional learning is different than, what we're talking about. It's not like, you have to be, I think we have to be careful, because as somebody who, again, I'm a elected official, we want to support policies that help children, but not every policy that helps children that we might refer to as social emotional learning or these other titles. It's not, it's not like this becomes this, becomes this, becomes this. So I think we have to be very careful. And I would say that, I don't know if the panelists want to weigh in, but I think, I hope I'm hitting the nail on the head, but I think that's like disconnected from what we're talking about here.
It is, yes. We're looking at positive foundations that we can work on through tiers universally, involving both schools and homes and schools, and as well as educating the educators to be able to support the children and have meaningful conversations at home.
Yeah, I think that's really the basis, because I think what we're talking about here tonight, we're talking about pre-service teachers, so people as they're training to become educators. We're talking about in-service teachers. We're talking about parents. And then we're talking about the community as a whole as well. We have mental health professionals in the schools, but not every teacher has those skills on hand to even identify when a child might want to be recommended that they speak to a social worker. And I can tell you, in another capacity, in addition to working with this fabulous group of talented individuals, I'm also co-chairing a task force on school safety and security that I've traveled the state. And one major issue that has come up everywhere is the issue of mental health. And tonight, I think we're kind of trying to bridge that gap to really talk about that. And I think it is important that we kind of, I don't want to say separate fact from fiction, because I'm not saying it's fiction. I'm just saying that I think that there is a separation of, things that we want to see, and then things that maybe are, might not actually be occurring in the classroom. So I think that's an important distinction. So, but thank you for bringing that up. Yes, sir. Yes.
Hi, hello. My name is Karen. I'm here as a parent. And my question is, why do you feel that having children share their personal negative thoughts in a group's classroom setting is appropriate? And the reason I ask this is that my thinking is that negative thoughts could be minor or they could be extreme. So how would a teacher, not having a, being a licensed clinical professional, handle an extreme negative thought in a classroom setting and, with a group of children? How would they help that child or those children process something like that? And is that appropriate? I personally feel it's not.
I think I'll take that one.
Good. So if you've ever worked with a little child, kindergartner, first grader, second grader, third grader, 12th grader, you can't stop them from talking about things that are troubling them. You don't need to prompt it, you don't need to provoke it, it comes out. The second part of your question, what do teachers do with that? Especially in elementary school, the person in a child's life who spends the most time with them, other than their parent, is probably that elementary school teacher. They develop the skill set of working with children. We have been teaching them more and more how to appropriately understand the child with the extreme difficulties. But often, in the end, what they do is they make a referral. They make a referral to the appropriate people in the school building who have that training and degrees. And we're trying to avoid some of the things that used to happen, which is when a child expressed a negative emotion, we pretended it didn't exist. And that's what we're trying to get away from.
And if I may just add, the artifacts that were presented with respect to those statements were conducted in a controlled setting by a behavior specialist in the classroom. It was not the classroom teacher who elicited the information from students. It wasn't publicly shared. They were private thoughts that were recorded on paper, and it was extremely powerful, empowering, eye-opening, and all students ended that particular session with being able to identify ways in which that they can speak positively to themselves and exercise positive self-talk.
Okay, thank you. Next up, our next question comes from Dana Playton, who's the immediate past president of the New York State PTA.
Thank you. So I don't need to introduce myself. My term just ended. If you're a PTA member, you've been getting emails from me for 2 years, and sorry, but not sorry. A lot of information to share. So I've been sitting here and listening to what everybody's been sharing. I'm a paraprofessional in the kindergarten classroom. So everything that you have all said, absolutely right on the nose. The children in my class, basically from the time that they were out of diapers, they were home. And so a lot of them, while their parents were working from home, they were watching videos. They were raised by tablets and computers, and we have computers with a mouse, but they're always touching the screen because they know how to do touch screen. They don't know how to use a mouse. So I hear that. I have a son who's now 33 who has ADHD, and so I relate to all that you were saying about that, although he really didn't have behaviors. He was in a gen ed class, so, I was very fortunate as he grew up. I have a son with autism. So I can relate to so many of the things that you were saying as far as early intervention. He's been getting services since he's 18 months. But what I haven't really heard a lot about, and this is the work that I'm doing as a New York State PTA now, immediate past president, I am running a task force, leading a task force rather, on mental health in our schools. And I'm not hearing about those students who really are in crisis. So I'm not saying that a student with ADHD is not in crisis. They have their own self-management that they have to get a handle on. I still have that with my son. However, we have a lot of students who, they have suicidal thoughts, and they are not functioning in school because they actually did better at home learning virtually. We have a lot of different issues going on that when I think of mental health epidemic right now in young people, that's what I think of, and not necessarily the behaviors that we need to help them manage and control. So, maybe the focus of this tonight was different than what I expected, and I learned so much tonight, both in the work that I do as a volunteer and the work that I do in the classroom. But I am very, very concerned about those students who really, they're falling through the cracks, and students that we never expected would commit suicide. We know what's going on in our schools now. So I spend a lot of time with my kindergartners, a lot of downtime with them, and I'm always listening. And I am always going to the teacher that I work with and to the school psychologist because I'm paying attention to every little thing, as someone just mentioned. But there are a lot of students, middle school and high school, no matter how much paying attention you're doing, you're not seeing it. And those are the students that I'm really, really worried about.
Can I respond to that a little bit? I did bring some stats from my district. In 2018, 2019, we had 135 suicide interventions. In 2019, 2020, we had 111. But in 2021, 2022, we had 254. So that number went up like double. And I think the reason that we actually, I think one of the reasons that the number went up, other than COVID, is that the iPads, or the devices that we gave to the students. Now, if they do a search on the devices, they're monitored by the district. So we get a red flag alert. So we're able to now follow up with the parents, the students, and try to get that child the help that they need. So I am definitely paying attention to
my school district does that as well. I guess I'm mostly concerned about the computer they have in their pocket. Right, yeah. The phone, social media, and all that, and I know, it's a whole another presentation.
No, so. I agree with you, but I just wanted to share with you that most of the kids that we've been seeing that have that sort of issue going on their social media accounts or whatever, if they're depressed, sometimes they write or search things on their district computer, and we're able to locate those kids that way. Many kids talk to their friends, and their friends, ironically, will go and seek out support for those students. So we do have a lot of that going on in our district, and we are doing everything in our power to address the mental health needs of students that are suicidal. We also did a parent workshop last year for parents.
Thank you. So in lieu of time, we could see that this is a very big discussion, and 2 hours certainly is not enough. And that's why when I first started with you, we went through the central theme for tonight, knowing that the parent component, as I mentioned, deserves a panel of its own, right, to talk about those issues. But the same thing for concerns of extreme behaviors. There's just so much, and there's just so much that we could talk about at one time. And we're all here for the same reason, right? For the wellness of children, because we care. And that's why I asked you who you were, because you matter just as much as we all matter too. So we appreciate your thoughts, your comments, and your questions. We appreciate you being here. But we're not done yet. This is just the beginning. Because for educators and service providers, OT, PT, not just social workers and psychologists, we all need to be on, like Ms. Young said, the same page. That's the times now. We need to know when kids are not thinking positively. We need to be able to recognize the signs when focus, their ability to focus, is impeding upon their ability to acquire information, to remember it, and then use it, right? Because if we can have interventions in the classroom that build up their ability to focus, guess what happens to their achievement gap? And guess what happens to their self-esteem, right? And that comes with support from the home and the school. But that's what we need to focus in on, is what's happening in the classrooms and in the schools too, to be able to keep up with the challenges that we have. And that's the paradigm shift right there. So raise your hand if you've learned something positive tonight.
I hope so.
Great. Okay. Raise your hand if you see there are problems to change and address. Right? All right. Raise your hand if you're ready to take some action to make those changes so we don't have to have children suffer as much anymore. Okay. So tonight's call to action is this. It's call upon your local legislators. Talk with them about your concerns, but talk with them about a renewed expectation of schools, but in a positive light. Why? Because schools are here, children are here, and homes are here, and no matter what, we need to work together in a positive way. Why? For one thing, kids. We also need to take action by talking to school board members, your neighbors, your friends, colleagues. You need to go to your schools, your administrators. We're in this together. If we choose to be, then we can take action and say, we need more training for our educators because our kids need coping skills. They need to learn to focus. They need explicit teaching that they never had. Because why? The system didn't allow for it. We're at different times. So, with that said, I'd like you to take, well, maybe you even have the handout, right? Here's some information. If you have any questions for myself, the panelists, you can use that contact information and I'll help bridge that gap for you. We are in this together. I hope you see that. Thank you very much for coming out tonight, and stay strong for our kids. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to our esteemed panel for joining us. Thank you all for coming out tonight.